I don't see, has he joined?
I have not
Well-
seen John join yet, so.
Oh, you mean, oh, well, I hope he makes it.
All right.
Okay, I have to say got it, don't I?
Yep, you gotta
got
say
it.
yes. Okay.
All right, all
All
right.
right. Well, why don't we get things started? I'm just gonna do a little introduction here. I probably everybody knows who Ellen is, and everybody knows Ellen's background. So I don't unless you want me to do the full introduction for you, Ellen, I can do that for you.
No, thank you, Mary.
Oh, here comes
Oh, here
John.
he comes.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
fashionably late, so that's good. All right. So I want to welcome everybody to Artists and Their Art for this Art Week month. You know, Art Week just started here in Marquette, so we have lots of great programs happening throughout the city this week. My name is Marty. I'm the adult programming coordinator for Peterway Public Library, also good friends with Ellen and John. I just am going to highlight a few things that are upcoming here at the library this week. So here we go. Tomorrow night we have a concert on the steps. And it is going to be on the steps. We have not been lucky with weather the last few concerts, but tomorrow it's going to be 82 and clear tomorrow night, so it should be a beautiful night for a concert on the steps. We have Brian Wallen and Mavis from the Make Believe Spurs who are going to be doing a concert at 7 p.m. Wednesday night we have another concert on the steps. That's going to be Lillian Presnell. She's a really great indie folk artist who's going to be doing a concert on the steps at 7 p.m. Also, Wednesday morning, we're going to have Upper Michigan Today at the library, talking about the book Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I think John was on Upper Michigan Today, I think in April, with us talking about his latest book. So we have that at 9 a.m. at the library on Wednesday. Thursday, we have a few things that are happening, but the thing for Art Week that's happening is a one-man show. Well, actually, it's a one-act show written by Troy Graham, who was the Performing Artist of the Year in 2022. Yeah, 2022. It's a one-act show that he has written, and there's going to be a few familiar faces in that show. He talked me into acting. I haven't acted in a long time, so I will be in that show. That's going to happen on Thursday nights at 6 p.m. in the community room. And then Friday at 12 noon, we are going to be showing we're doing a Summer of Spielberg. So we're going to be showing the original Raiders of the Lost Ark on Friday at noon with the best popcorn available in Marquette, made by yours truly. And it's free, and all of that is free. And if it's hot outside, it's air conditioned inside. So come on down to the library. So lots of great stuff coming up. But tonight we are going to be focusing on Donatello with Ellen. So I'm going to mute myself now and turn things over to you, Ellen. So go ahead, and I will shut my mouth now. So
Well, thank you very much, Marty, but I have another event to remind you all of. At 8 o'clock tonight, the Oilers and the Panthers are dropping the puck for the final game of the Stanley Cup. So we're going to get through Donatello in good time. Anyway, thank you very much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And I've given you Donatello's entire name, just so you know that Donatello was his nickname, okay? And this small list of artists introduces you, if you're not familiar with art history, I know some of you are, This list of artists gives you, names and dates and their significance to Donatello in brief. He worked as a young artist with the premier Florentine artist of the time, Lorenzo Ghiberti, and we'll get back to that in a few slides. And he was befriended by Filippo Brunelleschi, who of course was the premier architect. He was also a sculptor, but premier architect in Florence, and has quite a legacy. So they got to be buds, which I think is great. And then Donatello again, and then he worked with Michelozzo di Bartolomeo, who also was a sculptor and architect. So when Donatello needed some help doing, whatever he was doing with a given project, Michelozzo, as you'll see, was there to help him. Okay. This is the first significant sculpture we know of Donatello's. As you can see, it was created in 1408 to 9, and it's an over life size, although the measurement isn't here, over life size figure of David. It's about 9 feet tall. And you gotta wonder about the Florentine officials who commissioned this work from Donatello, because it was to stand on one of the buttresses of the more or less newly finished Cathedral of Florence. But it was determined, even though it's 9 feet tall, after it was done, to be too short. So it was never positioned on the buttress. And as you can see from the caption, it was moved to the Palazzo della Signoria and then finally to the Bargello. And we'll get back to that move in a little bit. Now, I'm going to talk about the form of this sculpture first. And it has to do with Donatello working as the youngster with Lorenzo Ghiberti. You might be familiar with the 2 sets of doors that Ghiberti created. Iconic, both of them. But this is just an example of the first set of doors and for the cathedral. And this particular detail I've chosen because of the posture of Christ. Now look at the way the figure of Christ is swaying to one side and another. He's being flagellated, but it's a very kind of gentle configuration of the figure, don't you think? Without any angst at all. And this is the kind of posture that Donatello exhibits here in the David. Of course, the situation is very different, but my point is, this is the influence of Ghiberti on Donatello. Okay. This is the Palazzo Vecchio, Palazzo della Signoria, the building which houses or housed the governing body of Florence. So extraordinarily significant. And this is where the sculpture was moved indoors. Here it is again. And this is what was then added to the sculpture besides polychrome, that is brightly painted pigments, that's kind of redundant, to liven it up. To those who fight bravely for the fatherland, the gods lend aid even against the most terrible foes. So what the government did was adopt this sculpture. I'm sure you know the story of David and Goliath, as an emblem of their fight as one of the few republics during this period and forward into the 16th century. So a way of, metaphorically, embodying their, what do I want to say, their pride in themselves, okay? And then the most significant part of the statue, I think, is the head of Goliath. Look at that. And we will see in subsequent sculptures by Donatello, this kind of individualization of features so that it looks like a portrait. This could be Goliath. The figure itself, very different, okay? Now, at about the same time, this young sculptor was commissioned for a sculpture for the only way I can put this to help you see what, you know, what you should be looking at, for like the second major story of the front, the western front of the cathedral, a sculpture I'll show you in a minute. But do you see sculptures on either side of the arches, like second level, I hope. Okay, in any event, St. John the Evangelist was definitely a turning point in Donatello's oeuvre. Before, as we saw, he was influenced by his mentor, Ghiberti. No more. Now, I want you to consider this image. I think you would say, well, it looks awkward. The torso is too long, the hands are too big, and the confluence of drapery over the lap, defining the legs to some degree, just doesn't make a lot of sense. This is the same sculpture, of course, to the left here, as it is positioned in the Duomo Museum. That is the museum of the cathedral. And we are looking up at the sculpture, okay? So here we are looking up at the sculpture. And what Donatello did was he made these concessions in the representation of the figure, so that from the point of view that is from a perspective, we would see the sculpture as he wished us to see it and understand it. Here, the figure looks out with authority, doesn't it? The torso isn't too long. The drapery over that defines the knees and the lap, in effect, define not just the lower portion of the figure, but if you think about it, it frames lower down that bearded prominence of the head and neck. No other sculptor, no other artist before Donatello had designed a figure from this point of view. Now remember, he's good friends with Brunelleschi, who developed at about the same time the modern theory of perspective. Maybe that was his, his influence. None of my sources said that at all, but I'm just saying, who knows? The point is, here is a figure of depth, of weight, and with an expression that cannot be denied. Very soon thereafter, Donatello was commissioned for another sculpture for the facade of this guild hall of Orsanmichele. Now, this is one of the most important buildings, along with the cathedral, in Florence, because it was built not only to house a chapel inside, but that's kind of beside the point, but to honor the 12 guilds of Florence. That is, the guilds which had to do with what do I want to say? Workmanship, that kind of thing that kept the economy alive. For instance, the sculpture that he was commissioned for here, the Saint Mark, was the saint of the linen makers guild. So those who, you know, wove and created linen garments and that kind of thing. So having to do with manufacture, that's the word I'm looking for. Now you're looking here at this photograph from a point of view which you do not have when you're there, because you were looking up at the sculpture when you were there on the street, for instance. Imagine yourself in front of the building here, looking up at the sculpture. It's actually in situ here to the left. It's a copy, anyway. And the figure looks, again, like the former sculpture. Too long, lanky. And in contrast, we'll get back to the long and lanky. In contrast, Ghiberti created this figure of John the Baptist about the same time. And again, I want you to notice, going back to, I'm not going to go back in terms of the slides, but going back to the David, the fluidity of the stance, which is echoed by the garment, which is beautiful, but it doesn't elucidate what is going on underneath. Okay, so in contrast to this, again, here's the young sculptor who's moving forward, and much better photograph of the Saint Mark, although still not from precisely the point of view that I would like. He's standing in a contrapposto position, which means that his right leg is the leg which holds the weight of the figure, and you see there, like in a classical column, the drapery is straight and it mimics the standing leg, okay? And then we see only in the other leg any indication at all, only of the knee, which comes forward, which is not bearing the weight. So contrapposto means weight against, if you're not familiar with the term. And it's a classical way of distributing body weight. And by the way, Donatello was a student of classical, that is Roman sculpture, and other niceties. We're not sure exactly what, but he was a classicist. And again, that just never was the case before him. So here we have over the knee that is at rest, we have a hand that is at rest, although holding a, you know, his scripture, and the other hand is down to the side, which mimics the standing leg. And you get a sense, don't you, of solidity, of weightiness, especially. And again, as with the St. John, here, St. Mark is looking out. He's not looking at us, he's looking out in a way that you can attribute whatever he may be thinking, you know, to the fact that he's a saint. he's looking ahead, looking out, maybe towards God, who knows, okay? Now, shortly thereafter, Donatello was commissioned for probably one of his most famous statues, the St. George. And in this particular image, you see the St. George in situ in the Bargello. I have a couple of other images which really show you the statue to a better, in a better regard. One of the problems that Donatello had with this sculpture was that, and look at the niche, this is the real thing. He had to create a figure that would, as you might say, would take up the volume of this very commodious Gothic niche. And he does so, as we'll see, in the way in which he has designed this figure to stand and to be extraordinarily forceful. Although, in terms of mass, doesn't take up the niche. Okay. So a little better view of the figure. In his right hand, by the way, you can see that there's a hole. He probably held some kind of sword, or we don't really know, but something out of metal, which could not be carved. And so that's why it's missing. And his other arm, as you can see, crosses over his lower chest and rests on his shield. Notice that the figure has 3 points of balance: the shield and his 2 feet. And if you look closely, the feet are not perfectly firmly situated on the ground, so to speak, but the figure is on kind of a tiptoe situation. Okay, so you got 3 points of contact. What I can't show you, unfortunately, is around the back of the figure is a swath of drapery, which covers part of that arm which rests on the shield and completes that kind of tiptoe situation in terms of the design. Anyway, so this is even better. He looks out, as the other sculptures have looked out. And each one of these sculptures, by the way, is an individual. This is another aspect of Donatello's sculpture, which was groundbreaking in that they are individuals. He doesn't deal, as we will see, in types, but individuals. And there are excerpts here and there about people talking to these sculptures as if they were real people, Anyway, so here you have a much better view of this seemingly static figure, but a figure which is ready to pounce. I hope you see that. He's ready to go at a moment's notice. Now, the insert takes us to the lintel below the figure. Donatello innovated this type of relief, rilievo schiacciato. And I hope you're able to see some of what I will try to describe to you. Well, first of all, St. George, of course, above, is known for having saved a princess from being devoured by a dragon. So here is St. George taking care of the dragon. This is a relatively shallow piece of marble. And what Donatello has done is he has literally carved in relief, relatively high relief, and very low relief, and then mezzo rilievo, which is in between, the entirety of this piece of marble. And so the most important figures, of course, the princess, the dragon, St. George, are in relatively high relief. But you can measure this relief by centimeters. And then what I really love about this is if you look behind the princess, of course, you see the classical corridor, right? That takes us into the distance to some degree. Again, perspective, his friend Brunelleschi. And then beyond to trees, which takes us into an atmospheric region, beyond measure. And this from one piece of marble, carved delicately, and in some places less delicately. So here's a very good view of our hero and the dragon. And it looks like it's, extraordinarily high relief, but of course it isn't. Not at all. And Donatello created this. There's nothing like this in classical antiquity, nowhere. Now, to continue with this conversation, I show you this extraordinarily beautiful image of the Madonna of the Clouds, as you can see, created a little bit later. We don't know why. We don't know where she originally was meant to belong. But those of you who are out Boston way, you've got to go to the Museum of Fine Arts and see this sculpture if you haven't yet. So, as I said, we don't know anything about the provenance of this sculpture, but clearly Donatello is using the same technique of rilievo schiacciato. And I have measured the depth of the carving of the Madonna's profile. And as I recall, it's something like 3 centimeters. And it looks like it stands out from the marble to a much greater degree. 3 centimeters. It's an extraordinarily beautiful design. I won't go on and on about it, but her right arm, as you can see, is such that it extends down to her garment as if she's trying to pull it up a bit, and helps us define the pocket in which she holds the Christ child with her other arm. The hands are very important here. And I should have said this before. In the other sculptures that I introduced to you of Donatello's, the hands are essential. And here as well. Couple of details. This is the angel in the upper left-hand corner. Look at that, barely carved out of the marble, but clearly understandable. And in terms of layers, one wing behind the other. There's depth there in this extraordinarily depthless, if I may say so, image. And then here's a detail of the Madonna's arm and hand again. and her other hand as she grasps the baby who looks out at us, communing with us. As I said, no one knows why this was commissioned, for whom, we don't know. Certainly would like to. Now, in that same vein, Donatello created this work. As you can see, it's not marble, it's bronze, which has been gilded. And this is from a multi component work. That's not very good English, but anyway, it's from a baptistry font that he helped to work on for Siena. And here, what is happening in the foreground is that Herod is to the far left, and he has his hands up in horror because he's being presented with the head of St. John the Baptist, okay? And on the other side, twirling around quite beautifully, is the woman who caused this to happen. So it's a biblical story, but I'm showing this to you because it's an adaptation of the Rilievo Schiacciato. It's not altogether successful, by the way. Nevertheless, we have the manipulation of the bronze, particularly in the middle ground and background, which is, you know, very slight in terms of modeling. So, as you can see, he works as his career progresses in other media. Okay. And speaking of working in bronze, he was, because of the success of the statues that I showed to you at the beginning, he was commissioned by the Guelph Party, and I'll get back to that in a minute, to create this image of Saint Louis of Toulouse, their patron saint. This was an extraordinary honor for this still young sculptor. He's middle-aged, not quite at this point. The Guelph Party was one of the ruling political entities of Florence, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And this sculpture would have originally stood in the 13th niche of Orsa Michele, of which there were 12, one each for each of the guilds that the Guelph Party oversaw. And he took this on with the help of his friend Michelozzo, and that's actually Michelozzo's design for the niche. And also Michelozzo helped him manipulate the bronze, and it's done in several pieces. So it's not quite what you might expect of a bronze statue, but nevertheless, it works. And as I said, it was, it was quite an honor for Donatello to be asked to do this. Okay. Now the Campanile, the bell tower of Florence Cathedral, was also decorated with sculptures at this time, that is, going forward into the 1400s. And here at the bottom of the slide, you can see a row of sculptures, and that's actually where we're going, to that row, although they're very high above one's head. But anyway, to give a former artist credit, the bell tower, the Campanile, was designed by Angiato di Bondone in the previous century. Okay. This sculpture by Donatello, as you can see, was created with the help of another friend of his. I didn't list at the beginning, Nana di Bartolo. And what is particularly striking about this pair is, well, first of all, Abraham was going to sacrifice his son Isaac. I don't know if you know the biblical story or not, but God intervened. He said, no, no, no. And what Donatello has encapsulated here is that moment that God communicated to Abraham that this was not what he was to do. So you can see Abraham looking up and in touch with God. His right hand, let me see, no, I'm sorry. His left hand is very tightly wound around Isaac's long hair. Do you see that? So there's tension there, great tension, but his other hand has gone limp. The other hand that he was going to use in just a moment to sacrifice this boy. And speaking of Isaac, getting back to another point, he is kneeling in a contrapposto position. But that's beside the point. It's this tension and then this laxity. It tells you the entirety of the story in the moment. Another of the sculptures that Donatello was created, that got commissioned to create for the Campanile, is this figure, which is known as Lo Zuccone, which means pumpkinhead. It might be the it might be the patriarch Habakkuk. We don't really know. But this is another of Donatello's figures, which is absolutely iconic. And what I mean by that is it's not just that it's without peer, but you see in the face of this figure such personality, and here it's suffering. It's a portrait out of Donatello's very being of Lo Zuccone. And I'm showing you the two sides, happily, good slide, to show you how he has manipulated the drapery, not only on the the front of the figure, but also behind. So we understand, although this was not visible, of course, only now in the museum, but manipulated the drapery so that we see an understanding of not just the body and the mass, but also the stance. Again, it's kind of a weak contrapposto, and you can see that from behind better than forward. And this is how the sculpture looks in the museo, and this is more or less how you would have seen the sculpture from street level, but even further below. So again, see what Donatello has done here is he has elongated the torso and also the lower body, right? And the hands, yeah. And here you see the figure as he wanted us to see it, in perspective from below. And it's even more, don't you think, forceful, more aggressive. Look at that face. He is in torment. And then the next, and for us, the last statue that Donatello created for the Campanile is this Jeremiah, also called Habakkuk, because we really don't know the identity. A very similar figure. Drapery is similarly treated. The face, very different. But again, these are personalities. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's either this figure or Lo Zuccone that it's recorded that Donatello said to it, speak, tell me. Now, in the vein of these portraits, as art historians call them, not of anybody in particular, but as I said, out of Donatello's mind, so that they become individuals. He was commissioned to create this reliquary bust. And here I'm going to borrow some words from somebody else. San Rosore was a soldier who was beheaded under the Roman Emperor Diocletian. Thus, Donatello's choice of the classic bust form, that is, it's cut off just right below the, you could say right below the nipples. This form was used by Romans to commemorate their ancestors when appropriate, and other important persons. And this is the first datable revival of this type of Roman bust. So again, going back to what I said some time ago, Donatello was a classicist. You could maybe call him an antiquarian, in that he studied Roman works of art. We don't know precisely what, but in any event, he was there. All right. And so this is a combination of that interest plus his interest, right, in creating a person, a personality in sculpture. And then there is this tomb in the baptistry in Florence, the tomb of the anti-pope John the 23rd, which means that he was one of the popes during a period when the church was divided, Greek versus Roman, and he didn't make out. But anyway, he was commemorated in this extraordinarily fine tomb. It is the first of what we call humanist tombs. And as you can see from the caption, Donatello worked on this with his friend Michelozzo, who's primarily responsible for the architecture. And you see it all of a piece in this particular image. So a humanist tomb, okay. It would have, as we have here, an image of the Madonna and Child above, then the effigy, and then a statement, as it were, of who the person is, and then sculptures of saints below. That's what you see here. And this humanist tomb type, again, here is another innovation on the part of Donatello, probably, with his friend Michelozzo, but nevertheless, which travels centuries into the future. It's extraordinary. But it also is another example of Donatello's undeniable interest in creating personalities. We have no idea if the Pope looked like this. But as far as Donatello is concerned, he did. So it's you know, it follows in the footsteps of the portrait bust and so forth. Donatello also was commissioned for this singing gallery, the Cantoria. Which came on the heels of another cantoria I'll show you in a moment by Luca della Robbia, maybe a name you know. And Donatello here exhibits again his dynamism, may I say, his lack of concern in this case for tradition, as these putti, these little angel figures who are dancing to the music that would be sung from the cantoria, and over the course of the the entire facade of this cantoria, having a great time. Nothing like this had ever been seen before. Look at this. It's not only marble, as you can see now, but mosaic and gold and colored mosaic. So quite sparkly actually in person. This is Luca della Robbia's cantoria. As Luca della Robbia's wont was, who was really a tried and true classicist, he divided up the cantoria, as you can see, in discrete scenes, rectangles, with people singing, playing instruments, dancing, but not by any means like Donatello. And here the two are. I thought you'd be interested in this view in the museo, hanging across from one another. Okay. Now, finally, probably the figure, if you knew nothing more about Donatello, probably the figure that you have identified with this sculptor. What's fascinating about this figure of this bronze figure of David is that, in fact, we do not know when it was commissioned, nor by whom. I mean, I grew up teaching this sculpture saying, well, it was commissioned by the Medici for their courtyard because that's where it was found and then moved when the Medici were ousted from Florence. But honestly, we don't know. So this is a life-size figure. As I said, it's bronze, as you can see too. And I've placed it in the 40s because that makes that best sense to me. In any event, it is the first life-size nude figure of the Renaissance. Well, since classical antiquity. And David has slain Goliath. And for the Medici, who did, of course, own it at one point, this was, humility over pride. Okay? It was a metaphor for them. And here you're looking into David's face. The eyes are not carved, as you can see. He wears a shepherd's hat. That's not biblical, but he wears a shepherd's hat. And he wears greaves. That's all he wears. And that very sexy bit of feather climbing up his thigh comes from the helmet of Goliath. And of course, we're talking, as you can see, contrapposto, classical contrapposto. And here is the head of Goliath. Very similar to the earlier head, don't you think? On which, in this case, David stands. And there's a laurel wreath, of course, that's symbolic of victory, which supports the whole. And just so you know where you are, visually speaking, this is the exterior of the Palazzo Medici, which was rebuilt beginning in 1444. And here's the dynasty. I don't want to take time to go through this, but we're talking about the second listed here, Cosimo il Vecchio de' Medici, who would have been responsible for the sculpture if it was commissioned by the Medici. And so here we have the sculpture again, and here's the courtyard in which it was found. The Medici were ousted in 1494. And at that point, the sculpture was moved to the Palazzo Vecchio. Again, because of the meaning of the sculpture that was associated then, redefined, associated then with the Republic of Venice. Now, I have a little bit of time left here. In 1443, Donatello traveled to Padua. We're not exactly sure why. He was probably lured by a commission, but 4 years later, he created this work, the first, like the David, the bronze David here, the first life-size equestrian monument, in this case, to survive from the classical past, not the first, but the first to survive. Gattamelata had been a successful general who fought with and for Venice, and Padua was part of the Venetian Republic at that point. And as you can see from the inset here, again, Donatello creates a personality. He didn't know what Gattamelata looked like. But gosh, it looks like he should have looked like this. Tough. A very well-honed warrior. He wears a combination of classical and contemporary gear in terms of his armaments. And his horse is very similar to the horse of Marcus Aurelius. Now, what I've left until this juncture is that in 1402, Donatello and his friend Brunelleschi traveled to Rome. We don't know what they saw, how long they stayed, or anything of that sort, but he had to have seen the Marcus Aurelius because it is echoed, clearly echoed here. Now, a fine point is that because of the weight of the bronze here, and remember, I mean, this is not Donatello's fort. The foreleg of the horse, which is elevated, is placed upon a cannonball, and you don't see that here, in order to facilitate a better support for the sculpture. Clearly, whomever created this sculpture, we don't know, knew how to elevate that leg without something underneath it. But and then here you can see off to the right how this sculpture is positioned in front of the Basilica of St. Anthony, which is one of the finest churches in Italy, and certainly a very special home to those who lived in Padua. And then I might get past drop time, sorry. Like the bronze David, we do not know when this figure of Mary Magdalene was created or why. Maybe Donatello simply wished to create such a figure. It is, again, one of his most evocative sculptures. Now, this is wood, as you can see. Wood, and there's some gesso, which means it's gesso is kind of like a paste that you can use to model, and then it'll solidify. And then, as you can see, also gilt and polychrome. Polychrome means color. But I've chosen a late date because I think it fits, but it could have been created 30 years earlier. We don't know. Now look at this. What can you say? It's just an extraordinary expression of fill in the blank. Just amazing. I chose the later date because of this work. The Medici, when they finished their new palace, commissioned Donatello for this pair of Judith slaying Holofernes. This again is, in that context, humility over pride. Lots of other meanings, I'm sure, but in that context. And when the Medici were ousted, this sculpture also was taken by the state and it was placed in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, which is where you see it here. Both statues, both figures, I should say, are life-size. And here you can see Judith very well, the expression on her face. See, do you know the story? She was an incredibly brave woman. And Holofernes was the general of an army which was more than a little interested in devouring her people. So what she did was she went one night to his tent. We won't go into details. Got him drunk and cut off his head. Got rid of the guy. And that's, of course, what's happening here. But apart from that, again, you can just stare in awe at the garment she's wearing, the hands, the expression on her face. You notice she doesn't look directly at Holofernes. And here, I think you can see a little bit better how he's positioned, kind of awkwardly, but anyway, positioned here and on a pedestal. Since been moved inside. And again, the Palazzo Vecchio in front of this historic building, government building. Then finally, left unfinished at Donatello's death, twin pulpits that he created, again, for Medici. So it would have been Cosimo de' Medici, so the elder. And there are two pulpits, as I said, the Passion pulpit here, and you see a detail of Christ. You see this at the top of this image. He's kneeling and he's speaking to actually an angel, but to God. And his followers, if you know the story, you know what happens. They're sleeping. They can't possibly stay awake while their Lord speaks to his Lord. And they're positioned all over the framework. This is another Donatello innovation. They spill out into our space to be part of our space, okay? And then also, in the same pulpit, something a little bit different, but same kind of thinking. Here is the body of Christ, okay, having been taken down from the cross. You see the ladder in the middle? And then on either side are portions of the two thieves who were executed with him. And here, it's not a spilling out of the frame, it's a cutting off of bodies. One at the knees, the other at the head. No one ever did this before. And then there's the resurrection pulpit. And this is the one detail I have of that for you. And again, here is Christ. He's just climbed out of his coffin. And again, the figures are spilling out over the dividers. We don't know who finished these works, but in any event, they certainly were designed by Donatello, and they are here in the church to be seen as you see them here on either side of the aisle, on either side of the altar, more or less. All righty. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah, you can unmute yourselves, or you can put them in the chat, and we can do it that way as well if you have any questions or comments.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Jeffrey.
Yeah, on one of the tombs below the effigy of the Pope was a bed was supported by two dogs or some sort of animals. Can you explain the significance of that of those elements?
Hold on. Here?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
the lions.
The lions. I'm sorry. Dogs.
Oh, that's
lions.
okay. Well, Jeff, they're habitual, symbolic animals of authority, you could say, I guess. They can stand for many different things. The Chicago Art Institute has a pair of lions in front of its main entrance. That's a real good question. I don't know precisely what they would mean here, apart from, a traditional meaning of, as I said, authority, power, something like that.
Yeah, I just thought they might be like some pathway to the afterlife or something. I don't know.
I've never heard that. I don't know, Jeff. Look it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, boss.
Bye,
Thanks.
Steve.
Does anybody have any more questions or comments?
Thank you, Ellen.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. I want to know who painted those lovely cabinets behind you.
I think his name is
Was Don Atello.
John Harrison O'Smolens.
It does fine. He does fine work, almost comparable to Donatello. He really does. So.
Well, listen, folks, I'm going to sign off, Ellen. I'll chat with you later on.
Oh,
to
yeah,
see
we
you
gotta
all.
get to the game.
Yeah. Yeah, my Canadian friend just showed up, so
Oh,
we're
did it?
shifting
Well, tell
gears
her
here.
hi. Okay.
He
Good
showed up
luck.
with a 6-pack of Labatt beer, naturally.
Oh, well. I hope we're
See
still
y'all.
recording, Marty. Are we
I'm
still
still
recording?
recording. I am,
All
so.
right, I'm quiet. I'm quiet.
No,
Talk
Elle,
later.
Elle,
Yeah.
it says that lions are, I just looked it up, are, because if you think about it, I think the New York Public Library has two famous lions at the front too.
Yeah.
And I
they do.
know Princeton has two very famous lions in front of Nassau Hall too. But it says it's a symbol of power and often of a king, but
Oh.
they're often put as guardians at entrances to block evil spirits and for protection.
Mm.
I bet you, it's like all of that combined here, Lynn. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right.
I think they bear a strong resemblance to the lion in the Wizard of Oz original film. Maybe there's some crossover.
Whatever you say.
We learned a lot. Thank you, Elle.
Well, thank you, Linda. You really appreciate it. And thanks for the coda.
Well, I wanna thank everybody for showing up tonight. If you want to view this again or share it with friends, the video of it should be available by tomorrow afternoon on our website, so you can look at it there. But I appreciate you, Ellen. You know that. We'll be hearing from Ellen again. Let's see, it's June, July, August, September will be the next artists and their art when we hear from Ellen. And I have no idea what we're going to be talking about, but it'll be fantastic as always. So
Marty, you're very kind. Thank you.
So everybody have a good night. And if you're watching the hockey game, I hope your team wins, whichever team it is. I'm not even going to pick sides here. So enjoy the hockey game and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, Marty, for you so much.
Happy
Thanks for
summer.
this.
Okay. Ciao,
Thank you,
ciao.
Ellen.
Love you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.